everyone. We've got another question for you from our Asking for a Friend series. And so today we're going to talk with Pastor Jordy about the question, hasn't science disproven Christianity? So let's dig in.
Yeah, science. I think it's important to explain what science is. I see on short videos on the internet, according to science, and I'm just like die inside a little bit. And so I want to read just the definition of science. The systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. You could say, in other words, I like to call science the study of what is. And I think there's an inherent thought because of some prominent intellectuals like Friedrich Nietzsche or Richard Dawkins, who have been strongly opposed to the idea of God, where some have felt there's this conclusion that science is actually in itself like against God or has disproven God, and that's actually not true. Science has observed some incredible things and explained some amazing phenomena, but there's also a lot of things that have been observed but not explained, a lot of questions left. And one of the big ones is actually like our origins as human beings, and just for our whole created world and our galaxy and the earth, where did we come from? And science actually does not have any like well accepted or respected like ideas of that. It has theories. And so it's important to note, like there's laws and there's facts and there's theories, and a theory is a possibility that doesn't have enough supporting evidence for anyone to come to an actual conclusion. Well, the most popular theory outside of intelligent design, as far as like what people believe just on average, would be the Big Bang Theory. That's one that's commonly attributed to science. Like scientists believe the Big Bang Theory, and that's true for some, but that's widely not true for many. And the Big Bang Theory, actually, when you hold it up against some laws that are in science that are foundational to our observation of the world, it actually doesn't do so well. Specifically, the second law of thermodynamics. It's this idea that things naturally move from order to disorder, and that any time that there's any type of transaction of energy, that energy is lost. So when an animal eats something, or when photosynthesis happens, or when light is absorbed, anything like that, heat from the sun is absorbed by the world, some energy is lost. And so it's foundational in our observation of the world that actually, given more time, even though there's moments where we'd say actually something incredible happened from that volcano and the world organized a little bit, that given enough time, things are always falling into disorder and energy is always being lost. And so eventually, once enough energy transactions happen, once enough people live and eat and animals swim and poop and die and all those things, there would actually not be any energy left, and all life would cease to exist. And there's not anyone who's respected in the scientific world that says, actually, I don't believe in entropy. I don't believe in the second law of thermodynamics. And so when you hold that up to the Big Bang Theory, which we haven't explained but is pretty widely known, this idea that there was a mass explosion or event of energy, and energy somehow organized into what we would call like very intelligent design or life forms, and the gravitational orders of our planets and the way things move and interact, and species that specifically interact with each other in the environment in very precise ways. The Big Bang Theory says all of that happened given enough time, because there's always a chance. And what we know is, well, given the second law of thermodynamics against that theory, is that things actually, given enough time, always move towards disorder and energy loss. And so while it is an act of faith to believe in a God, to believe in a creator that we maybe haven't seen or felt in tangible ways, though some would say that they have, it's also a leap to say that I believe, given enough time, that you and I exist and all these things exist just naturally. I don't think if I asked you the question, if I were to build a bomb and put it inside a junkyard, do you ever think that I would just ever end up with a high-tech helicopter? Given enough billions of years, Lauren, like billions of years, wouldn't we see that helicopter? I don't think you would probably have high hopes that it's going to have a working radio and landing gear, and to think about like to to be set with the right specs that work against the gravitational pull on this earth and the air density for that thing to actually fly. It's unimaginable. And so it's also a leap of faith to say that God doesn't exist. And science, while it's observed many things, there's actually a lot of questions that scientists are left with that leave a lot of space with God. And God is actually a very simple solution to a lot of those questions, belief in God. And so for me, I feel that it would be a larger leap of faith to say God doesn't exist and didn't create me and all of this happened by chance than it would to say, no, I think this is intelligent design and I think that there's a God who continues to be at work in the world and continues to sustain and give life, something that's higher and more powerful and able to create life. And you consider that with even just the historical narrative of Jesus's life and the cross. There's so many questions for one man to live life, to be not violent, but to be peaceful and not to seek worldly power, but to die in his 30s and then to see Rome flipped on its head and people willing to die testifying about him and to see his impact still reigning to this day. And the life change that we see within the four walls of, well, the many walls, but the four outer walls of this church. We can point at that and say that life change is something that's hard to explain, that's observed, that's happened because we've led people to Jesus. And we could point at that and say, well, maybe God's the answer to that. And so I would say that science hasn't disproven Christianity, but it's observed things that for Christians we would point to and say that's obviously signs of God. And for people who would say, I don't believe in God, they would say, all right, well, I have a different theory, but I would say that those theories often are a large leap of faith as well.
A lot of just how can you explain this? Like you're saying, what we experience here in these four walls, outside of these four walls, in the mission of Grace and other churches. How can you explain that?
Absolutely, And a lot of the best scientists are really humble, and they sit before these questions in awe and wonder. And there's great scientists who have come to Christianity as a conclusion of that, and many who haven't or have just stayed in wonder. And there's been a few who have been very, very adamant that God doesn't exist, but I've also just noticed a pattern of anger and resentment towards God, and I find it hard to believe that those emotions could exist towards someone who's imaginary as well.
That's great. That's good. So what about like someone that was in the faith or new to the faith, super scientific, like things line up in their mind, with science? What would you suggest for how to navigate just the questions that we sometimes have about this stuff? Like, it's not making sense because science does seem right, or science did disprove it. What would you suggest someone does? Again, I've ran into that narrative a lot. Sometimes it'll be a family member who will say, hey, could you talk to so-and-so in my family, because they're very much like an intellectual and they're very scientific and they have reasons they don't believe in God. And I find when I talk to that person that in some instances, and I'm not saying this about any specific listener, but in many instances, a lot of this actually hasn't been deeply explored, but sometimes it's been more actually influence of scientific role models or prominent figures in the scientific community that have chosen a specific theory or things like that. But when you follow the facts, the space is always there, and what is officially accepted in the scientific community, the space is still left there for God. And so from that point, I would probably recommend researching the life of Jesus and the resurrection. The Case for Christ could be a good place to start by Lee Strobel. Cool. Okay, that's a good,
absolutely.
I love that. Okay, so just to get in and research yourself, right? And we can all form opinions like that with no background, but start researching, start looking for the holes, start looking for, like you said, the space in between, and just remember those things that you can't really explain.
Absolutely. And I think that at the end of the day, you connect with God in your heart, and there's a part of the journey that's just not fully going to be intellectual. And so I would really recommend pursuing God as a person in prayer, even though that might feel weird for you, and really just trying to sit before and think I'm going to start praying. I'm going to learn about the person of Jesus. and make sure you pursue the relationship, not just do research as well, because you ultimately you want that connection with the living God.
Yep. Yeah. Get to know Jesus, not the religion, but the right.
Absolutely. Not a system of beliefs, but a person.
Yeah. I love that. Great.
Thank
so
you.
good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this has been so good for me and encouraging. I hope that it's been for you as well. Thanks for taking part in this series, Asking for a Friend. Have a good one.